Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. We'll be getting started in just a few moments.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Acing the Interview. My name is Kristen Soprano, she, her, hers, and I am a career consultant here at the UConn Center for Career Development. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. You should see your attendance interface on your computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just go ahead and select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may also send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll be collecting these and addressing them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Note that this presentation is being recorded and will be emailed to all webinar registrants within 24 hours. Now that we've gotten some of the housekeeping items out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the agenda for today's presentation and what you can expect to learn over the next coming slides. First, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into preparing for an interview. We'll go over some tips and best practices to really help you make sure you're putting that best foot forward the day of an interview. We'll also review some of the common interview questions you may face on an interview day, including how to answer tell me about yourself, strengths and weaknesses, as well as a review of behavioral interview questions. And then lastly, we'll wrap up today's presentation with talking about some additional best practices and tips to succeed. So let's begin by discussing some best practices to prepare for your interview with the thought that the more prepared you are for an interview, ultimately the more confident you'll feel and the more natural you'll come across while speaking with an interviewer. The first thing you're going to want to think about as you prepare for your interview is performing a self-assessment. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody and after walking away from it, you thought, oh wow, I can't believe I forgot to say this, or maybe even, oh, I wish I had told them that. These are the statements you want to avoid saying to yourself after an interview. Performing a self-assessment and familiarizing yourself with your resume, past experiences, and skill sets will help to make sure they are top of mind and therefore very easy to recall and fully describe in an interview. This should allow you to leave the interview feeling confident in the responses you provided and the information you gave the interviewer. Secondly, it's recommended you do some research on the company, position, or program you're interviewing for. Start by rereading the job or program description so you have a clear definition of what your roles and responsibilities will be, as well as any projects you may be working on. You will also be able to identify key skills and characteristics that the interviewer will be looking to learn more about, which will ultimately help you anticipate questions that may be asked in the interview and help you prepare your responses accordingly. When you're researching the company or program, you'll want to familiarize yourself with more information than just what's on the front page of their website. For in-depth information, go deep into their website and look for more information on their history, mission and values, as well as their current goals or initiatives. You can also view their social media channels or even reach out to individuals that are currently working there. Having more insight and being able to speak about this information will not only show the interviewer you are genuinely interested in their opportunity, but it'll also help you formulate questions that you'll want to ask at the end of the interview. Having questions prepared ahead of time based on the research you conducted may help you make a decision on whether or not you'll accept an offer from the company or program should one be extended to you. We'll talk a little bit more about asking follow-up questions later in this presentation. Last but certainly not least, one of the best things you can do to prepare for an interview is practice. The Center for Career Development has lots of great ways to help you practice for an interview, including one-on-one conversations with career coaches like myself, scheduling a practice interview, or using our online resource, Big Interview. You can learn more about these resources or schedule practice interviews by visiting our website, career.uconn.edu. In addition to performing a self-assessment and researching the company or program, you are also going to want to do a little bit of research on how you should dress for the interview. Although it's typical to wear a full suit for an interview and dress more on the business professional side, some industries or programs are less formal, and you could potentially get away with wearing something that's a little bit more business casual instead. Knowing the common dress code for the industry you're applying to will be a good indicator of how you should plan to dress. For business professional, a basic neutral pant, suit, and matching dress shirt, as well as, dark dress socks and matching belt are typically recommended. You want to make sure that everything is pressed and free of wrinkles with minimal accessories and makeup. For the business casual side, you could get away with, nice pressed slacks such as khakis or dark dress pants. A nice, clean, polished dress shirt, again, could be button up or polo. Potentially even a conservative skirt or dress with a nice blazer or cardigan, also with minimal accessories and or makeup. You also want to make sure you're avoiding any kind of distracting items like excessive jewelry that may bang bang and clang as you're talking, which could potentially distract from the responses you're giving during your interview. To help you make a strong first impression the day of the interview, there are a few steps you can take the night before and the morning of, which will help you focus on the interview itself. For starters, try laying out your clothes the night before and making sure everything is ironed and your outfit is fully put together so that you have one less stressor to worry about the day of the interview. In addition, getting a good night's sleep will be helpful in keeping your body in its normal rhythmic counters every day, helping to reduce the amount of adrenaline that will start flowing as the interview time approaches. Going to bed the same time you normally do and waking up the same time you normally do will help your body feel well rested, which is exactly what you'll want. You'll also want to think about reviewing directions to the location of the interview in advance. If you have an opportunity to do a test drive to the location prior to the interview, it's recommended. But if not, at least make sure you're familiar with where to park, what entrance to use, and also consider being familiar with an alternate route to the location in case you encounter any unexpected traffic. As far as what to bring to the interview, we recommend you have with you a portfolio with a few extra copies of your resume, as well as any other supporting documents that may have been required during the application process. You can also bring a small briefcase or bag to hold any other items you may have, such as your car keys or cell phone. If possible, you may want to consider leaving your cell phone in the car, but if this isn't an option, make sure that it's at least turned off as opposed to just silenced or vibrate to help ensure you don't encounter any unexpected distractions during the interview. Arriving 5 to 10 minutes early will help to make sure that you have time to familiarize yourself with your notes and questions, as well as allow you time to acclimate to the environment. This will help to reduce nerves and allow you some extra time to take care of any last-minute personal needs. Lastly, you'll really want to make sure that you're making that strong first impression on anyone you meet the day of the interview, including parking lot attendants, security guards, and receptionists, as you never know who may be asked to provide input on your interview performance. Before we transition on to talking about some of the common interview questions you may face during an interview, I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions about anything we've discussed up until this point, that you can type them into the question pane in the control panel. I'll be collecting those questions and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. During an interview, you're most likely to encounter three different types of questions: traditional questions, behavioral questions, and case-based questions. Depending upon your industry, you may also be asked some very industry or company-specific questions, but you should be prepared for these three types of common questions as well. First, we have the traditional questions, which are generally asked in all industries and usually are designed to get you talking a little bit more about your personality, your values, your interests, and background. These questions are more open-ended and allows the interviewer to get to know you better as a person and as a candidate. Next, we have behavioral questions, which are used for the employer or interviewer to really get an assessment of how you would act or behave in a particular situation. The thought process is that how you've acted or reacted to a situation in the past will give them an insight to how you will act or react to a similar situation in the future. This allows them to really see you in action without actually getting to see you in action. Lastly, we have case-based questions, which are used to assess your analytical skills as well as your approach to problem solving. These can be in-depth questions that you might be provided an extended amount of time to come up with a response to, or they could be something that is more on the spot and just meant to assess your reasoning abilities. One of the most common traditional questions you will be asked during an interview is the "tell me about yourself" question. When you're responding to this question, you really want to make sure that you are using a strong, unique opening, which will help differentiate you from other applicants. During this time, you also want to make sure that you're explaining your background and your story, as well as describing your prior experience and relevant skills as they are needed or related to the position or program you are applying for. You also want to make sure that you're outlining your future plans and how aligning yourself with this company or program will help you achieve those future plans, as well as be of mutual benefit to that company or program at the same time. You want to avoid talking about hobbies or personal interests unless they're relevant to the position. You also want to avoid any negatives about past experiences and making sure that you're honest and genuine and coming across as very natural and not robotic. Summarizing the key points of your resume rather than repeating it is also key. The interviewer has seen your resume, and now they are looking for you to provide more information on what they've already seen. So making sure that you're developing a full narrative and helping paint the full picture of that story will really come into play in answering the "tell me about yourself" question. Let's say, for the sake of example, that I was applying for a sales opportunity and the interviewer asked me, "Tell me about yourself." One of the ways I might think about crafting this response would be something along the lines of beginning with my unique opening. Well, all my life, my mother told me I had the gift of gab. She always said that I would talk to a stranger as though they were a close member of the family, and at the end of the conversation, I'd be able to sell them on the fact that the sky was purple. This is a unique opening that is different from any other opening that another applicant would give. So therefore, it's automatically going to set the tone for the interview about how I stand out from everybody else. It's also going to grab the interviewer's attention and make them lean in to want to hear more about what's going to follow. So after I've provided this unique opening, I'm then going to start to transition that a little bit more into my background, my skills and experiences that I'll bring to this particular opportunity. So my response may then continue something along the lines of, "It was because of this unique realization at such a young age that I had such strong persuasion skills, I ultimately decided to enroll in a sales major at the University of Connecticut and really pursue that as a career. As part of my studies, I've enrolled in several courses such as Sales 101 and Persuasion 3204 to really be able to capitalize on my unique gifts as well as further develop them from a business point of view." So this is now, again, continuing more of that story of what I can bring to the table and how that relates to that early background and story. Finally, I'm going to think about wrapping up my response that talks a little bit more about my future goals. That could come in the form of something such as, "Through this coursework and my time at the University of Connecticut, I've really discovered that I'd like to enroll in a sales leadership development program, such as this particular one at your company. I hope that through this program, I'll be able to further build upon the knowledge I've learned in my studies and apply that in a real-world setting. I'm also hoping in the near future to be able to go on to become a national sales director of a large corporation such as yourself to help increase overall product revenue as well as drive home sales for the company itself." And this again is talking a little bit more about what my future plans are and also how that's going to be a mutual benefit for myself from my own personal and professional development, but also to the company by talking about how that's going to help them generate some sales. Some of the other common traditional questions you may be asked in an interview are, what are your strengths and/or what are your weaknesses? When responding to these questions, you want to focus on transferable skills and avoid using general or generic terms like hardworking or dedicated. It's recommended that we use these transferable skills because they usually have a shared definition that all individuals can relate to, whereas generic terms can be left up to interpretation. For example, we can all probably agree upon a similar basic definition of what good teamwork or communication skills are. However, our definitions of hardworking could be drastically different. For example, I might define hardworking as I'm in every day when I'm supposed to, I leave every day on time, I work my 40 hours a week and do my job responsibilities. Where your definition of hardworking could be, I'm in every day before the boss, I leave every day after the boss, I work my required 40 hours and then usually 10 or 15 more on top of that. I meet my minimum job responsibilities and then always go above and beyond to do at least 10% more. So these variances in definitions could definitely play a large impact on your overall interview. As you articulate your strengths, you want to make sure that you're choosing skills that are relevant to the position or program you are interviewing for. In addition, you also want to provide examples of how you've used that skill in the past to provide a demonstration of how that will actually be of particular benefit to the particular company or program you are applying for. This will allow the interviewer to get a real sense of that strength in action. Now, on the flip side, when you're speaking about your weaknesses, you want to be honest and genuine and choose a skill that is somewhat related to the position, but not so related that it'll prevent you from performing the responsibilities of the role. Choosing a skill that is completely unrelated could come across as inauthentic and almost as though you were trying to avoid answering the question. So again, for example, if I was applying for a nursing position, I might not describe my weakness as my technical design skills or my graphic design skills, because that's so unrelated to the field of nursing. However, if I said my group presentation skills could use some improvement, I'm alluding to my communication skills, but I'm prefacing it by saying it's in large groups as opposed to one-on-one communication, which is very important in the field of nursing or healthcare in general. Once you've given those weaknesses, the most important thing is demonstrating the actions you're taking to overcome those weaknesses or develop them. So again, if I talk about having my weakness be my group presentation skills, I will immediately follow that up by saying one of the steps I've taken to overcome this is I've enrolled in some public speaking courses, or I've joined a professional organization that is designed to help provide me with tips and tricks on public speaking and speech development. So this slide here just shows a few other examples of some types of traditional questions you could encounter during an interview, such as why are you interested in working in this industry? What are your short and long-term goals? Is there anything else we should know about you that we haven't already asked? Again, these are designed to be more open-ended questions that's going to allow the interviewer to get a better assessment of your overall personality, background, and values. We've gone over a lot of information so far on traditional based questions. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the question pane on the control panel, or just make note of them and I'll be happy to answer them when we open up for the Q&A portion. Next, we're going to spend some time talking about behavioral-based interview questions. Behavioral-based interview questions are questions that interviewers ask to get a better idea of how you will act in a particular situation or setting. Because they can't physically see you perform an action, or they can't actually see you handle a specific situation, they ask these questions to get a better determination of how you react to future situations based on how you acted and reacted to past situations. When you are responding to these types of questions, you essentially want to tell a story or create an interview narrative for the interviewer to give them the full scope of the setting you were in, what you were trying to overcome or achieve, and really demonstrate or paint a full picture on how you did that. The same way every story, because again, that's what you're going to be telling, a story. The same way every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, you want every behavioral interview question response to have a STAR. And STAR is an acronym for situation, task, action, result, and relate. When you're outlining the situation, you want to provide an overview of the context. What was the setting? Where were you working? What were you involved with? Who were you involved with? Next, you want to shift into what the task or the project that the particular story is about. Again, what were you working to achieve? What were you trying to overcome? What was the overall task at hand that you were trying to solve? Next, and what will be the bulk of your response, are the actions. You want to provide detailed information about the specific action steps you took to achieve the task you just explained. These actions essentially become your sales pitch in the interview response. This is where you are really going to demonstrate to the interviewer what you can do and how you will respond to similar situations in the future. As we start to wrap up the narrative, you want to make sure you explain the result. So what were the outcomes of the actions you took? What did you learn as a result of those actions? Because again, this is going to start to summarize a little bit of that story. Then finally, you want to relate that story to the overall interview. Really tell the interviewer what was the reason for picking this example to talk about. How does it relate to the particular position, or how does it relate to the industry, or even to your own personal and professional development? Now that you've become familiar with the STAR method, let's take a look at it in action. As you can see from this example, the interviewee is being asked to describe a time that they took initiative. The individual starts off their response by describing the situation of working as a residential assistant at UConn. They further quantified the situation by saying how many students they were responsible for, which helps to provide the interviewer with more context about the level of responsibility they held. They then went on to describe the task, which was developing educational programming for students on their floor. Their action steps provide further details about the specific approach they took to developing the educational programming. The fact that they demonstrated their desire to poll students to see what they were interested in learning about instead of just picking a topic of their own choosing helps demonstrate to the interviewer the individual's initiative and desire to really engage and connect with their audience. The interviewee further demonstrated their initiative by conducting additional research to see if there were organizations on campus they could partner with to provide the information students were asking for. Notice the way the A and the two R's have the most text next to them. This helps to illustrate where you should put your focus in behavioral responses and therefore spend the most time preparing for and talking about. Finally, the interviewee starts to summarize their example with the result of the actions taken. They highlight and quantify the increase in attendance to show the impact of their efforts, as well as share the praise they received from their supervisor to demonstrate that they are reliable and results-oriented. They end their response by relating their skill sets and experience to the needs of the position they're applying for so that the interviewer can clearly see how they will be an asset to the company or program if hired. During an interview, you'll recognize you're being prompted for a behavioral question because they typically begin with phrases such as, give me a specific example of, or maybe they'll even begin with, tell me about a time when. They could also begin with a phrase such as, describe a moment in which you. These again are all lead-ins to those behavioral questions, and as you can see on the slide here, some more examples of those types of questions. Finally, the third and most common type of question you could potentially face in an interview is a case-based question. These questions allow the interviewer to assess your analytical skills and approach to problem solving in a real-time environment. In the past, these types of questions have been most commonly asked in the sales or consulting or medical fields, but are starting to become more and more common across other industries as well. Traditionally, there are three main categories that case-based questions are broken down into, which are business, logic, and brain teasers. We'll talk more about these in a few minutes though. For now, I want to take a minute and ask everyone to think back to a time when you were sitting in a math class, whether it was in high school or here in college, but just really think back to that environment that you were in. I'm sure at some point during your academic past, you've heard a math teacher tell you to show your work. This is the same concept that applies to answering case-based questions in an interview. You want to make sure that you are clearly demonstrating your thought process, or i.e. showing your work, in your interview response. While the interviewer will be expecting you to present a conclusion, the accuracy of that conclusion may not always be as important as the thought process that you've actually used to come to it. Sometimes the interviewer may provide you with materials or resources to help you develop a response. Other times they may not. If you are provided with these tools, it's okay to use them to help you draw the best conclusion possible to that case presented. Don't be afraid to ask any clarifying questions you think would be helpful in developing your case as well. On this slide, you'll see a few examples of some case-based questions. The first question that asks you to determine the number of traffic lights in New York represents a logic question. This is a great example of a question where the conclusion may not necessarily be as important as the approach that you took to try and solve it. While the interviewer doesn't expect you to actually know how many traffic lights are in New York, they are very interested in learning more about the logistical steps you took to find that answer, as well as the resources you may have used to support your conclusion. The second question about wireless headphones demonstrates a traditional business case. In this example, the interviewer is not only assessing your approach to problem solving, but they also are going to be looking at your ability to provide solid recommendations or solutions to the problem based on your analytical approach and your reasoning skills. Lastly, the third question on the slide represents a brain teaser. The question, which could sometimes seem unrelated to the company or program on the surface, is asked so that the interviewer can assess your ability to think critically and quickly under pressure without becoming confused or overwhelmed. Your reactions to this type of questions will be assessed just as much as the answer that you provide itself. Now that we've discussed some tips on developing interview responses, let's take a little bit more time to talk about best practices for the actual interview performance. How you act with an interviewer is just as important as the response you provide to their questions. With that in mind, you want to make sure that you are putting just as much thought into your verbal and nonverbal actions as you do into developing your narratives. When speaking with the interviewer, remember to use formal grammar and avoid any slang or overly conversational language. You also want to be cautious of using excessive filler words such as yeah, or like. Typically, excessive use of these filler words or sounds is attributed to one of two reasons in an interview. The first being a fast rate of speech. When we get nervous and the adrenaline kicks in, it's not uncommon for our rate of speech to pick up as a result. Our brains start to process words and thoughts more quickly than our mouth can physically speak. This then results in our body just naturally trying to fill those gaps with sounds, yeah, or like, to try and keep up. If this becomes the case, take a second to internally acknowledge your nerves and slow your rate of speech as a result. The second reason people typically use excessive filler words in an interview setting is because they don't feel 100% confidence in the material they are talking about. Whether it's highlighting your own skills, talking about a past experience, or even demonstrating your knowledge of the company or your future goals, if you don't feel completely comfortable with the subject you are speaking about, those filler words will come out as an attempt to fill the gap of the thoughts you are trying to articulate. This is where performing a self-assessment and having a clear understanding of the position or program, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, will play a key role in helping you feel more comfortable and confident in your responses and ultimately avoid you help using filler words. It's also a good idea to remember that silence in an interview is okay. Don't feel you always have to fill a gap in the conversation. Sometimes the interviewer may need a few extra seconds after your response to finish writing their notes before moving on to the next question. As long as you've provided a clear and concise response that answered their initial question, it's okay to have those few seconds of silence. However, you don't want to use silence at the beginning of a question simply because you're unsure of how to answer it or need extra time to think about an example. Again, this is where that self-assessment is going to be helpful because it will limit the amount of time you need to spend thinking about an example and will allow you to more quickly provide a response. You should avoid skipping questions whenever possible as well. If the interviewer throws a curveball at you, and it happens in interviews, but if you do receive that curveball that you weren't prepared for, it's okay to take a few seconds to think about a response, but just make sure you're keeping the interviewer engaged during that time frame. For example, try saying something like, "Wow, that's a really great question. Let me think about that for a moment." I'd say the best example I can think of was the time when I Using a phrase like this while simultaneously thinking about an experience to talk about is a great way to acknowledge the interviewer's question while still gathering your thoughts. For your nonverbal cues, you want to remember to make eye contact with the interviewer at least 70% of the time. This not only shows that you're fully engaged with them and giving your full attention to the interview, but also demonstrates your level of confidence in the skills and experiences you're highlighting. Maintaining a good posture and using hand gestures while smiles appropriately can also showcase your enthusiasm for the position or program. Be cautious of overly exaggerated hand gestures or fidgeting, though. That could be a result of nerves. If you feel this is an area of concern, try holding a pencil in both hands under the interview table. This will help to keep your hands busy and also prevent any unintended fidgeting. Now that the interviewer has asked you all of their questions, it's time for you to ask them a few of your own. This is where some of that research you conducted during the interview preparation stage is going to benefit you. It's recommended you prepare at least 3 to 5 questions to ask the interviewer at the end of your interview. These questions could focus on next steps in the process, training and development opportunities, additional projects you may work on, or even current events currently impacting the company or program. Asking questions tailored to the specific interviewers are also a great idea. For example, I understand you've been with the company for over 10 years. What do you personally find rewarding about this company that's kept you here so long? Questions that should be avoided during this phase of the interview include anything related to company criticisms or anything that's controversial. You also want to refrain from asking questions that are related to salary, work hours, holidays, benefits, and so on, as it could make it seem as though the paycheck and the benefits are your highest priority and not the position or company itself. If the interviewer hasn't already addressed these topics with you prior to or during the interview, you'll have an opportunity to ask about them at the time of offer should one be extended. At the beginning of this presentation, we talked about making a strong first impression in an interview. But what some people fail to realize is that the last impression you make on someone is just as important as that first one. To help make sure you leave a strong, lasting impression, genuinely and enthusiastically reiterate your interest in the position or program. As you stand up to exit the interview room, remember to push in your chair and clean up or dispose of any garbage you may have created, such as empty water cups or bottles, paper scraps from a case interview question, etc. Be sure to thank everyone for their time and assistance, including the parking lot attendants, security guards, and receptionists that we mentioned just a few short slides ago. You also want to refrain from removing or adjusting your personal attire or appearance too soon. This includes loosening your tie, removing your jacket, or even checking your cell phone as you walk to your car. Just because you've walked out of the front door doesn't mean the interview is over. You never know if the interviewer or decision maker is watching to see how you act when the quote-unquote pressure is off. To err on the side of caution, it's always good to have the mentality that the interview isn't truly over until you've returned home. After the interview, you want to send a personalized and unique thank you note to each individual you interviewed with. This note should be sent via email within 24 hours of the interview, and an additional handwritten mailed card is encouraged but certainly not required. Make sure that the note includes a reference to something you specifically connected with the interviewer about, whether it was something interesting they told you about the company or program, a follow-up to a response you gave, or even a personal connection you made, for example, discovering you both have a mutual friend that works at the company. Occasionally, individuals may receive an offer on the spot. However, the company or program may also need additional time to interview and assess remaining candidates. Regardless of when you receive an offer, it's recommended that you not say yes or accept on the spot, as this could potentially cause you to lose your chance to negotiate if you so desire. When responding, first thank the individual you are speaking with for the exciting news and reaffirm your enthusiasm for the position. But then make sure you ask if you can have some time to review the offer. Demonstrating enthusiasm does not tip your hand for negotiations later on. If this is the case, you'll also want to ask for the offer details in writing to make sure you and the company and program are on the same page with the offer details and that there's no unexpected surprises later. If you need some additional guidance after having a conversation like that, we recommend you call the Center for Career Development as soon as possible to schedule a career coaching appointment. A career consultant can help guide you through how to accept or decline the offer, how to balance multiple offers, or even ask for more time if you need to negotiate the offer. These types of conversations should usually be had with an employer about 48 to 72 hours after the offer is extended, so your timing will be important. Throughout this presentation, we've discussed a lot of tips and techniques that will help you succeed in an interview. Now it's time to take some action steps to help bring you one step further to acing the interview. For starters, you can schedule a practice interview with the Center for Career Development to put some of the tips and techniques you learned today to use in a real-life simulated interview. If you're unable to make it to the Center for Career Development in person, you can also utilize Big Interview, which is an online interviewing practice platform that you can use from any location. For additional information on how to prepare for interviews involving multiple people, or interviews that are a full day in length, or are even being conducted via phone or computer, check out our online supplements for unique types of interviews. As we mentioned on the last slide, a practice interview is a great way to put some of the best practices we talked about today to use in a real-life simulated interview. The Center for Career Development offers practice interviews for all undergraduate and graduate students, as well as doctoral and postdoctoral candidates. These appointments are designed to expose you to traditional and behavioral style interview questions, as well as provide you with personalized feedback based on the concepts we discussed throughout the presentation. Practice interviews are approximately 45 minutes in length and can be completed at any point in your career development timeline, even if you don't have any formal interviews planned or in the near future. As we've already discussed a little bit today, Big Interview is another great resource that is available to help you prepare and practice for an interview. It's a self-paced virtual interviewing website that allows you to read content, view sample questions, and even conduct practice interviews using your own webcam. The program allows you to select customized interview questions by competency or industry to help you feel more confident in your tailored interview responses. Its video recording capabilities also help you to prepare for virtual interview formats, which are becoming more and more common across all industries. Big Interview also offers video-based lessons that help you navigate the interview process from start to finish based on how much time you have to prepare. If you don't have that much time and have an interview coming up in the very near future, there are short and condensed lessons to help you get some of the basics, but then they also offer longer in-depth interview lessons if you have a little bit more time to prepare. The lessons build upon some of the key concepts we discussed today, but also provide valuable information on other topics we didn't discuss, such as how to answer inappropriate interview questions. You can access Big Interview by visiting www.biginterview.com and clicking Get Started in the upper right-hand corner. I've found that this particular platform seems to respond best using Google Chrome. And when you log in, you also want to make sure you're using your UConn affiliated email address. At this point, we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines and start taking some of the questions that you may have, as well as answer some of the questions that have been coming in throughout the presentation in
So it looks like we have a few questions that did come in the chat box as we were going through. So we'll start by reading some of those, but again, just want to encourage everybody, if you do have any questions about anything we've reviewed so far, to please go ahead and type them into that question box there, and I'll be sure to answer them for you. But the first one that came in is somebody asked, what happens if I can't come up with a weakness or don't have an example for a question asked? So, in one of the earlier slides, we did talk about the importance of not skipping a question. And that self preparation that you're going to do is really going to try to help you from being in that situation. But sometimes, again, you might just really be thrown that curveball, such as a question like, tell me about a time you missed a deadline. So maybe you really never have missed a deadline. Maybe you're thinking, oh, I've always gotten my work done on time, or I've always handed my projects into my professors when they were supposed to be. But that's where you really want to take a deeper look and really dig deeper into that self-assessment. And there's got to be some time in your past where you've missed a deadline in some capacity. So that could even be about a time where maybe you had a networking meeting scheduled with somebody at a local coffee bar, and you totally forgot about the appointment and you missed a meeting with them. Or maybe even it was a time where, let's just say you're really struggling for an example, and it was a time where you failed to pay a bill on time or something like that. So again, it's never really appropriate to skip answering a question, but you really want to make sure that you're digging into not only professional experiences, but also academic experiences or even personal experiences when needed. It's okay to pull examples from your personal life as long as they're not private life. So again, if the only time you can think about a time you missed a deadline was a time you missed a bill, well then okay, that's what you'll have to talk to. But really challenge yourself to take a deeper look as to ways that you can think about answering maybe those not so great questions that you haven't prepared for. We also have another question that came in asking how long a typical interview response should be to a question. One of the things that I always like to say to individuals is the length of time of your response can vary. The appropriate amount of time is whatever amount of time it takes you to fully, clearly, and concisely answer the question asked. This is where you start to get to that slippery slope of, if I told you a response time should be about 1.5 minutes, you may get so focused on making sure that you fit what you need to fit in 90 seconds, as opposed to really focusing on what is the content that my interviewer needs to hear, or what am I going to tell them that's fully going to be able to answer their question and show that I can perform the roles of this opportunity. So again, it's not so much of having a specific time limit that you want to focus on, but more so your length of response should be targeted to, am I telling them everything I need to tell them in as concise a manner as possible? So hopefully that helps provide a little bit of an answer to that question. Again, these are great questions that are coming in through the chat box, so please go ahead and, continue submitting them. I have another question here in relation to what I should wear to an interview. And this individual said, I once received advice that you want to stand out in an interview, and a good way to do this is through what I wear or the color that I wear. So there is some advice that's out there, or suggestions that are out there as far as aligning yourself with particular colors. I mean, we may have all heard that, red is particularly associated as a power color, and therefore, wearing red might help you come across as more confident and present in the interview. So if you think back to what we talked about on the slide, as far as, what to wear for the industry, again, typical recommendation is a nice neutral color. So a black, a gray, maybe even a brown. It's okay to infuse some color in your wardrobe. I'd still recommend keeping to a nice solid color as opposed to any kind of print or patterned color. But that is, something that you could think about doing subtly. The biggest thing you want to remember is that you should be remembered in your interview performance based on just that, your performance, the responses you gave, and not necessarily anything else such as what you wore. So you don't want to be remembered as that person who wore the all red suit but you might want to be remembered as that person who gave really strong, confident, powerful answers that could have also been accentuated by the color that you chose to wear, such as like, a red blouse under a black suit. So hopefully that is provided some more insight. I want to thank you for all the questions that you've submitted. And certainly if you have any additional, please feel free to come in again and visit the Center for Career Development for any future needs that you might have. Have a great afternoon.